Good morning. Welcome to a few moments of talk with WisdomWord here. We wanted to talk about suffering today, and I think one of the main reasons is that right now there's so much suffering going on in the world, and so many people in stress and in trauma, and even with the first world kind of issues that we have, people are stressing, and certainly in the third world there are starvation and war and maiming and imprisonment and all kind of loss of free speech and the different things that we're seeing in the world that come from separation, that come from making some person or group of people the other, and then forgetting their humanity, and then forgetting your humanity and your or our compassion. So you easily see how when you get disruptive internally, you can bring that disruption into the outer world, and then that disruption in the outer world kind of feeds back into the internal stress and the internal worries and suffering, and that creates a bigger mess. So we start to really realize that, what's that saying? Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me, that it starts and needs to start here, right now, in every given moment. And so one of the tools that we use and talk about a lot is mindfulness, and learning to be present in the moment, to bring your thoughts and your body back to the same place in this moment right now, and to watch your mind, to focus on something like the breath and begin to watch the mind and start to notice the thoughts that crowd into your head and recognize which ones are just not beneficial at any rate, and they're fear-based. They're coming from a fear of something being taken away from you, a fear of being hurt or harmed, a fear of being uncomfortable. So, not fitting in, all levels of fears on all these different levels. And so, in thinking about it, I always find it helpful to go to wisdom, coming from teachers in the past or current teachers I see, and to be able to use my own discernment to and time with myself and my mind to seek out what is coming to me from the outer world, what I'm reading or what I'm hearing or what's on the news, and to be able to discern what is truth and what in fact and what is not, and how I can align with my inner truth and behave accordingly to the inner truth of the higher being, or the diamond mind that's beyond all those obscure fear-based thoughts. So there's such a benefit um, from the tool of mindfulness, of meditation, of taking time out from the noise of the world and finding your center again and finding yourself. So that said, this is why we do our little talks and we share together in our group calls and teleconferences and so on and so forth, because we can help each other keep that centered, balanced place that we wish to keep, and that the stability and the equanimity that we would like to cultivate more fully. So today I was kind of really thinking about the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. So Siddhartha, the original Buddha that came forth, he was, a rich guy living in his world. And in a sense, we could say we're all princes and princesses in our life because we have so much. We have food and we have warmth and we have housing, and yet, we still stress and worry about getting more or having less or having it taken away, or sometimes even feeling guilty that we have. So there's all this kind of suffering that can go on. The suffering of the body and the wars and the peace and the lack of peace and the discrimination and all that kind of stuff that's happening in the world, but also the internal suffering that goes on every day, and because of insecurities or fears of not being good enough or not fitting in, or whew. So going back to this guy, this prince, left his home and went out in the world, and he saw suffering, and he didn't know it because he didn't live it. He didn't grow to it. He was living in the confines of the palace and everything was nice and comfortable and groovy there. So he's out in the world, he sees people suffering and he doesn't understand it. He asks the question, why? And I think there's a certain time in all of our lives when we ask why. Why did this happen? How did this happen? What's going on? And so one of the things, so he struggled for a while and he became an ascetic. He gave up everything and didn't eat and was fasting and sitting and meditating under the Bodhi tree and going through his struggles, of temptations of to just let it all go and give in and whatever the temptations were. And he finally, kind of overcame them and he came to this awareness. And this awareness, he started doing this teaching, just as Jesus, the master, started doing his teaching when he went through his sufferings and awareness and brought teachings to the people. And one of the teachings that is a basic foundation of Buddhism is called the Four Noble Truths. And these four truths that Buddha came up with were that there is suffering, that a truth of life is, or a characteristic of life and living in this world is that life is inherently characterized by suffering, dissatisfaction, and ultimately impermanence. So, all those things that we want to get or want to have in our life, they are impermanent, including our body, and that's something that we tend to push away and don't think about a lot. The second noble truth was the truth of the origin of suffering. And so this is really interesting because it ties in a lot with the practices that we've been doing, the mindfulness, the awareness, the watching the mind, and recognizing that suffering, according to the Buddha, arises from attachments, cravings, particularly the cravings of comfort and sensual pleasure. And, if we don't get it or we don't have it or we're uncomfortable, then, we feel like we're suffering and we start that suffering pattern internally, of feeling like, even more than usual, less than, or more than usual, not getting what we want. And then the third noble truth is the truth of the cessation of suffering. And so this is where the awareness comes in that, okay, so let's accept the fact and the reality that life is going to have ups and downs and we're going to have stuff happen and we're going to have suffering as are other people, that's an inherent characteristic. And now let's look at the fact that a lot of my suffering, so we look at ourselves, is caused by that I want things to be a certain way. I want the world to be a happy place, and it's not, So whatever that attachment you have to an outcome is or to a desire is, you start to recognize that it causes suffering when it doesn't happen if you're attached. And, if you're discriminating and saying, this is the way it should be and this is the way it shouldn't be. And, woof, it just keeps you in that falling apart, separating, pulling apart inside yourself space. And then, of course, the cessation is saying that I can overcome my suffering by my practices. So, that leads me to a different place. And then thirdly, the fourth noble truth is the truth of the path of suffering, or the truth of the path, the truth of the path, sorry, the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering. Suffering to get those words out. So the truth of the path to the cessation, the stopping of your suffering, lies within these he goes on to say the Eightfold Path, and lies in with a lot of the things we've been studying. So looking at the things that are bringing you pain or causing you pain, and finding a way to accept the reality that, okay, some of these things may not change. What can change is me. And what are some of the things that change my perceptions or change how I look at things or change how I feel at things? And, for me, meditation, mindfulness, reading supportive books, listening to podcasts or teachers, finding a way to take time out from the things that are increasing my fears or my fear-based attachment to something and giving myself that spaciousness that meditation brings. So the Four Noble Truths, the first time I ever heard them, I don't think I even put them together and listened to them in a progressive way, the way I'm speaking of them now. The acceptance of the fact that there is suffering, that's a characteristic of life. The recognition that uh, the recognition that there's a cause of that suffering, and that cause a lot of times is me, really looking at that, not pushing outside of yourself and saying the cause is these bad guys or those bad guys or this unfortunate or I wasn't born rich or whatever it is that you decide that makes you unlucky or unfortunate, your circumstances. And then the third is the recognition that there's a way to seize that, to cease that suffering. There's a way to stop that suffering. Again, it goes back to you. You have to practice and the tools. And then the third is the path to the cessation of that suffering is you using the tools. So just keeping that in mind and thinking about the tools that work the best for you. You can put down in the comments maybe which tools work the best for you and what has been helpful for you around this. We'd love to hear from you. So that's our few minutes of mindfulness and focusing on some deep truth today that may help us find our internal truths and lead us to that path of the ending of suffering. Blessings, everyone, and have a beautiful day.